I think it can be confusing to be a man in this world, trying to navigate, finding yourself, feeling.
There's so many people who walk around emotionally numb, like, no, I'm not feeling anything.
So often it's the fear that can lead to the self-sabotage. If I don't sit with that part of me, I'll push someone away. Where your energy and focus goes, that's what's expanding in your life. And so if your energy and focus is onto like hate and aggression and anger, then like you're breeding that. When you can feel held, that's when the walls can start to come down. So men or women or anyone who's watching this, like if you want to feel more of life, that requires
Hello listeners, back with another episode, and wonderful to have you here. Wonderful to have you as always. And I'm here for a wonderful man, a man who I've been following for a while. And today we're really getting to around the emotions that, you know, come up for us around the people pleasing, because people pleasing is this thing that comes up a lot inside the work I do with men. And I'd like we'll talk about men and emotions. Who knows? But, you know, beyond here, who knows what we're going to talk about, because we don't plan so much. But today I have a wonderful man, a man I follow for a while, and I love his work and the way he compassionately just brings himself to the world and shares his message around the importance of emotional intelligence and mastery and letting go of the trauma and the baggage and the masks that really hold us back. How are you doing today, Kieran?
Yeah, I am excited to be here, brother. And yeah, as I was saying to you before, like I'm feeling really tapped in. I was writing music this morning and letting that flow through me. And now I'm here today to let this conversation flow through me. And yeah, feeling on purpose, feeling centered. And especially coming into 2025 after what was a turbulent 2024 and took me to some depths, and I feel like I've collected myself, loved on myself, nurtured myself, filling my cup and getting to give from the overflow, which feels really, really nourishing.
Fantastic. Beautiful. And I like to always start with people, I always like to people's journeys. What was your journey into the work that you do now?
Yeah, the journey into the work I do now, I'll start with like the boy. I was a boy who was in a family and I felt extremely loved. And I grew up thinking that I was like, I have a good childhood, and I still believe that. And yet I was also the boy who hid in the cupboard, who hid under the bed, who would hide when emotional dysregulation was taking place and where anger was, and emotional immaturity from caregivers. And so I was terrified of confrontation, and I went through my life with wounds of rejection, confrontation, abandonment, embarrassment, and that shaped a lot of my life. It shaped a lot of my life in how I showed up in relationships with partners, the nice guy, like never having anything wrong in relationships with friends, overgiving, saying yes to everything, burning out. And alongside the conditioning and the programming of that, there was always my heart. I feel like from a young age, I've been able to tap into it or follow like what really felt true to me, even in the face of people challenging me or not being conventional. And I went on that, and maybe not so many people in my background know about this, but I studied like sustainability and environmental management and had a big love and care for the planet. And before I was ever in the mental health world, I was actually in the sustainability world and that sort of space. And as I came to understand why we do what we do, I started to move more towards mindset, more towards this work and meditation practices, connecting with my first ever mentor, Chitti Anand, who was the first place that I ever got to really feel seen, heard, held, like just loved on without judgment, and a place where I could start to feel, because I'd had experiences of feeling from strong emotions. The death of my father at 17 left a lot of grief with me, but there was a lot of repressed emotion where I couldn't cry without watching a sad film, where I repressed anger. Like I was the classic, I don't get angry. I'm not an angry person. And I had all these emotions that I repressed and put down. And working with this first mentor of mine, like I started to connect with that, move it through me, express it, and realize, wow, there's a lot I don't realize that's had an impact on me from my childhood, from my teenage years, and even my adulthood. So that took me down even further into the rabbit hole of the work, getting into coaching containers, learning more, growing more, studying, doing a certification with the Elementum Institute, and also starting to do work alongside organizations like the Unmasked Man, facilitating men's retreats, and also sharing my own work as well. So that's a bit about my journey.
It's quite as always, you know, it's often I find with the people I speak to, whether they're therapists or coaches, it's like it starts with our own pain, our own struggles in our own lives, you know, and with you, it sounds like the kind of classic people pleaser / nice guy of not free, like the anger piece. I think is so common for men. It's like we experience anger, usually, like you said, in caregivers or people around us, and we receive it as like, anger is bad, I must never be angry, right? And that's the only way I can be kind of quote unquote a good man. But what do you see as the impact on men when they just almost just ignore their own anger?
Yeah. So for years, I was that man who ignored my own anger. And the reason I ignored it was because of what I experienced. And also because of the experience I had, I was like, that's what anger is. And so actually, I don't want to be, like, if I'm angry, I'm that, and that's bad, and that's wrong. So there was this shame around the emotion of anger and what it would mean to be angry. And so it was just stuffed away. And how that showed up was lack of boundaries, and this was tied into my fear of confrontation. So because of my experience of anger, I was terrified of confrontation. And because of that, I couldn't meet people in confrontation. I would go into a freeze or flight response and just be like, okay, or even often fawn and be like, yeah, we'll go with what you're doing. And that's okay. So I had no boundaries. I didn't really stand up for myself in certain ways. I would go along with people. I'd say yes when I didn't really want to, because I was also afraid of upsetting people. I was afraid of them getting angry. I took over responsibility for people's emotions, thinking that if they were upset, that was my fault. And so I would do whatever I could to make sure somebody wasn't upset. I would over-explain to make sure I wasn't misunderstood. It was also paired with an anxious attachment. So I would send messages to people, and if I didn't get a response, I would check 4, 5, 6 times, being like, how could this be misunderstood? Like, what's going on? Like, why aren't they responding to me? So those were some of the common ways. And it was just this like forgetting of me, and this putting me to the side and putting forward who I thought I had to be for everyone else, but not even realizing I was playing that character. And underneath that is just the resentment that builds and that drops into the resentment jar, and then eventually that breaks. And I never tended to explode at people, but there was just this disappointment within myself, or this feeling like I wasn't who I was supposed to be in certain areas of my life, or how I wanted to be rather than supposed to be. And that's how it showed up for me.
Yeah. So it's like this. And how would you describe that feeling of what that you felt of like, I'm not being the person I want to be? Like, how did that feel for you? How did that feel in your body? How did it kind of show up, both mentally with the thoughts you were having, but even like emotionally?
Yeah, it was, let me just feel in. How did it show up? It was this sense that was like, there's more for me, and that I was in these relationships that I would overgive, or would have this anxiousness around. And so the anxiety showed up a lot in my body in those relationships. It was this tightness in my chest, like a tightness around my throat, often around expressing myself. solar plexus, the center of self, I would get this like churning feeling in my solar plexus of then not being as in my truth as I could be. And a lot of the time I didn't realize this. So I would have been, and if I'm honest, like earlier on, I wasn't as connected to my body to even like notice what was going on. So to be aware of, actually, I wasn't in my body enough to really be like, oh, I'm feeling this. Yeah. So that's how it would show up for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Because that's the thing is, you know, I see this with a lot of men. It's like they feel that they're not really being their kind of true selves, who they are isn't coming through. They feel like they have to be a person to be liked, to be, you know, and it comes through so strong that there's like a block to them even stepping into the person that they know they are. And like every moment that comes, they'll meet some friends or meet some new people, they'll meet a woman, and they're so quick to move into the person they think they need to be accepted.
Yeah.
And it starts to build up, like you said, this resentment, even an anger, a feeling of shame as well comes up from a lot of them. And when I speak to them, they're kind of like really stuck, and they can't really, especially the shame can be such a heavy piece, you know, because shame has this way in which is like just weighs us down and makes us hide. Was that something that you felt yourself in that time?
I don't think I was fully accepting of all my parts and all my emotions and my experiences. And I was so needing of validation and approval and acceptance and love from outside of myself that I would just be who I needed to be. And I think there was shame around experiences that I had of expressing myself. One of the things, I told you I wrote a song today. I used to sing a lot when I grew up, and I remember like this one instance of playing like a school band sort of thing, and then somebody like challenging me around that and questioning me and saying like, I studied grade 8 of musical theatre, and I often had people being like, oh, well, prove it. And there was something for me about that was so like, I feel it in my body now. It's like, I don't want, like, that's horrible. I don't want to like prove anything. And even those sorts of experiences, like I stopped being as expressive with my music, or I remember going to university and just playing a bit, but not really embodying this part of me that's like been a love since I was a child. And so it's sometimes so funny. And again, with the men and women I work with, that one experience that can seem so insignificant and be so significant for that inner boy, that inner teen, that inner girl. And those experiences like were the ones where I then had shame around my expression. Same was with dance. I used to love dancing. I grew up dancing, like, and my mum was very dancey and expressive and a big character. And I remember like a friend on a night out, I was dancing. I was like, I've been learning some break dancing. I was doing it on the dance floor. And then my friend was just like, you look so stupid, or like, get up, like almost embarrassed by me being in that expression. And again, I didn't dance for years, and then came to find things like ecstatic dance. And the only time I would dance around that would be when I was drunk. I would be drunk, and that would be the loosener for me to start to express the things I loved more. And then when I went on my journey more into sobriety or without alcohol, finding ecstatic dance and spaces to start to move my body, and the fear of judgment was there, and the shame of my body and my expression and these experiences was there. And so it was the exposure to that and the loving of myself in that and the safety of these spaces to start to explore that more.
Yeah. Got it. And there's something interesting you touched on there was around the kind of dance, and the thing I see again with a lot of men is like how other people's opinions of what they're doing almost overweigh theirs. Like, you know, for example, you know, you talk about the love of dance, all it takes for someone to say that, you know, your dancing looks stupid or silly, and then suddenly your feelings about your dance are like lesser than this random person it could be, you know, this way in which there's like the lack of kind of being self-referenced.
Yeah. And I feel like when as a growing up and having people pleasing tendencies, my way of reference was to so many other people's emotions. So I would see myself through the lens of how other people were reacting or responding to me. And so it was easy for me to, I think, fall into that pattern of like, oh, well, they're thinking this, and like, let me stay accepted. Let me not be rejected. Like, and that was so key for me. And like, even when I was more starting my journey off, even on dating apps, like I was so needing female validation and approval. I'd be on dating apps, I'd be in the bathroom and I'd just be scrolling, trying to have conversations with people I didn't really connect with fully, but I just wanted to be seen. I just wanted to be, and I didn't know this was going on, but I just wanted to be validated and feel liked and just have some sort of connection in that. And so it was really, and it's interesting because there was a duality. There's times in my life where I've been steadfast in my heart, where I've gone for like, oh, this feels like it's on my heart. I'm going this path. And there's other times, which actually tended probably to be in the more interpersonal relationship sort of space, like in relationships where I was more questioning and wasn't as sure of myself as you spoke. Like I didn't trust myself in those spaces. I wasn't sure of myself. And I gave a lot of my power away to other people because of the experiences I'd had.
And is that a kind of coupling you see quite a lot in the people that you work with as well?
Coupling in what specifically, David?
Oh, in terms of like giving their power away, you know, with other people, and the kind of the people pleasing.
Yeah, for sure. Like I think the people pleaser will give their power away because ultimately their sense of safety, sense of worth, of value is found externally. And so if it's found externally, I have to give it to the external to try and get that. And ultimately, like it never is outside of us, but I didn't have that validation, acceptance, approval, that love for me. And it was really my inner child. It was the boy who was afraid of confrontation and needed to be loved and needed to be protected and needed me to be there and in my man. It was the boy who wanted to play football with friends on the playground and they all ran away and he chased after them and they ran away again. It was that boy who needed to be seen and heard and just know, like, and to feel what it felt like to experience that, and then to be loved and to have his needs met, because I was just seeking my needs being met in everyone else. And I gave my power to people in that way. And still, like, there's still subtle ways that I see myself give power away, right? I'm a coach. I get coached. And at times in the past, I have given my power to other, like, you be the one to get me here. You be the one and it takes me outside of myself. It takes me outside of what is truly my unique gift that will be the thing that will bring what is meant for me. But if I'm playing a character or playing a mask, I heard this saying recently, it's like, God can't give to you through who you're pretending to be. And I pretended to be someone and wasn't necessarily getting what was meant for me through that.
And this kind of pretending to be, do you think that, and I guess you kind of work with men and women, I wonder if you see it show up differently for men and women? Like obviously we have different conditioning, right? Men and women have different conditioning. I guess the question I'm asking actually really is, like from the work that you've done and you work with men and women, who do you see, and this is good, it's going to sound like a really binary question, but we'll start with this. Who do you see as like most trapped by the kind of ideas of how we think we should be? Is that kind of the men that you see or the women that you see?
I think there's an equal trapping, but for different reasons. And what I mean by that is there's ultimately like a societal conditioning, and it also depends, right? Societal conditioning, cultural conditioning, it can really cause someone to be in a space of either giving their power away, people pleasing more, having different responses to things. I see a lot of men who are nice guys, cut off from their anger, cut off from their like expression of their boundaries, like just trying to appease their way through life, and afraid of rejection, afraid of the word no. And I see men maybe being more conditioned by within, if we were to look at societally, like I think anger is probably one of the emotions that is most in the past, maybe most available or most like allowed in men, but also it's on the having experienced that generationally. I think then it becomes that maybe what I experienced or the person who's afraid of experience anger, or the person who's afraid of their own anger because of the hurt it could cause. And so I think then that can lead to suppression of that, and the suppression of, and I think we were like in a really interesting point in time where like how the world is seeing men and the shitting on men that takes place. And I just have the understanding that there has been so much that has been affected through the patriarchy, and actually that men suffer so deeply through this, and women have suffered, men, children, like everyone has suffered through this. And there is an energy that is going towards men that I believe it's almost like express yourself, but actually you're shit. And like, it's these different energies that can be felt. And I think it can be confusing to be a man in this world, trying to navigate, finding yourself, feeling, having boundaries, having needs, but also trying to figure out where you sit in the society as it changes. And I can go into women, but if you want to add anything onto that, David, like I would love to, love to hear that.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you. There is a lot of, as you put it, shitting on men. And I think I was listening to a podcast recently and by John Wynard actually, as I was in the gym yesterday. And it's like a lot of the men of today are like at the pointy end, I feel, of the anger that is felt by women for generations. That's been generational, right? And not just it's not just women really. It's like minorities and like everybody, right? It's like pointing this anger at men now. And what I hear in men a lot is like, I didn't do it, And I really understand that sentiment because, I sit here as a man as well, be like, well, I've only been alive 40 years and I've tried to be good in that time. I'm not responsible for what like happened 200 years ago because I wasn't alive. My ancestors were like either, enslaved in Jamaica or, hanging out in Africa. Yeah. And it's like, well, I'm not responsible for that, but I'm bearing the brunt of all the anger about it. And I think a lot of men really struggle with that and get quite angry about that, especially online. I see a lot of men do that online. And then there's the kind of added piece of that is, like you said, the patriarchy isn't really, it really benefits a very small percentage, a few people at the top of the tree. And actually the average man, like, really also is deeply disadvantaged because, like you said, he's told that he shouldn't feel, he shouldn't emote, he should be really just a provider of things to people. And then we've got this, what's really been shifting for probably the last kind of 30 years of like, oh, but you need to be like a new modern man who feels and expresses. And then he may come up against family members, women he dates who still have kind of instilled in them a picture that they'll project onto that man of how he should be. And he should still be this stoic, cold man. And I see some really interesting instances when I work with couples where the man starts to express sadness or upset and he's been holding it back for ages, and his partner meets him quite unconsciously in that moment with like disgust or like not necessarily like a disgust or like or even anger, like, oh my God, how dare you take up emotional space, or is met with what's the one? It's like a confusion of like, what, you have feelings of emotions? Like what? And what's really interesting about unpacking that with couples is they're like, oh, the woman sometimes comes and goes, wait, like I think I'm this modern woman, but underneath this unconsciously, I have absorbed this kind of patriarchy that makes me look at men and be like, well, if he emotes, then he's weak. Like, and she's having to kind of reprogram that. So men are living in this really funny time where there's like these multiple messages that are coming in, and then they have their own fears, their own fears of rejection, of not being good enough, and so forth. So I find that the conditioning on men is really heavy, while also confusing, because you could be in, all sorts of spaces and spheres, and it's like, oh yeah, like emote and express and feel, and that can feel really safe there. But if you go out into like I do talks in corporate companies sometimes, and you go into a corporate company and you're like talking about feelings and emotions, and you can see the look on the people and the men's faces in those rooms. You're like, oh yeah, this hasn't really seeped in as deeply into this world as we are hoping for. And obviously things kind of take time.
Yeah. And I feel that's the shame. That's like the societal shame around emotions. And we see that come through, right? Whether it's the parents who have no relationship with their grief or their anger or their sadness or their joy, whatever it may be. And then it's just passed down. And that shame is, I think, the thing suffocating our society is the shame of these emotions, of what it means to feel and looks like to feel. And I think it's also then finding the balance of like, oh, okay, I can start to feel, because I've gone there. I've swung into the feminine pillar and felt it all. And then I've sort of got a bit lost in my feelings, and then trying to find my way back to the masculine pillar and at dance of like, let me feel and not get lost in this, but allow myself to process, allow myself to go there, and also be able to come back to that more grounded space. And I think as well, and this is where the work, right? And I would say women are, it's not ahead of men in the work, right? Like that, I think there's a propensity for women to be more willing to invest, more willing to seek out and to search for the work. And so I think often women can end up initiating men in the sense of like being the spark point for a man to get into the work. And I think if you've got this beautiful combination of men and women in the work, like, I'm so grateful for my partner who can hold, like, who I get to hold thanks to the work that I've done and to the capacity that I have through my nervous system regulation and my tools. And also she's able to hold me and support me if I need to collapse. And I think that can be a confusing thing as well. It's like, oh, how much can I collapse? How much can I take up space in the emotional realm so that polarities don't become skewed? Or I think it's a very nuanced landscape, emotions, and especially as soon as you bring in a relationship or dating. So it's something that I continue to navigate in my relationship and feel into. And I can notice the part, like you said, that's like, no, I can't feel this much. I can't take up this much space. And this is my work. So let alone if people aren't in this is my job. I want to say job, but that's not the word. Like, this is my love. And like, I'm still figuring it out. And I continue, probably I will be for the rest of my life. But it's so nuanced that can provide just confusion as well.
Yeah. It's so nuanced. And like, I think men often are just looking for a map or a set of directions to how to do things, and, we live in this age where we have influencers like Andrew Tate and so forth for like trying to give young boys maps on how to be. And as men, we like to have a structure, there's that masculine part of us that like structure, but with kind of feeling and emotions, it's hard to give people a very solid map, and like, okay, if you do you want to, in your relationship, express your sadness, and you have to follow these 15, these 3 steps, because it's like emotions are these really subtle energies of subtle cues and messages of what's kind of happening in your world. And, young boys, there's a bunch of research about how young boys are really like, their emotions are beating out of them from a young age. So it's like when we get into our older years as men, we're not really sure how to. And then there's a lot of a fear around emotions for men. Is that the big fear I find for men is like, a lack of feeling emotionally safe, right? Yeah. Lack of feeling emotionally safe to express, because that comes from years of bullying that we've experienced ourselves. If we're unlucky, you've had a father who even bullied us. I've seen it with my own eyes where, young boy is sad or upset, and he's like, big boys don't cry, or like, come on, sort yourself out, it's fine, and really telling them that feeling isn't okay. So we've learned this. So then we get into this adulthood and we got to do relationships and dating. and we don't know how to navigate this really intense experience in our bodies, right? Which is emotions. And we kind of just like push them away or try and get them right, or try and, I find men go a lot of ways. Like some men go the way of like, let me just do what women told me to do and like be super sensitive and super nice, and kind of the people pleasing nice guy where it's like, I'm nice, I'm kind, I'm never angry, I don't have boundaries. Like, oh, you didn't turn up. You turned up an hour and a half late to the date. It's okay, no worries, I had stuff to do. And actually that's also really a disservice to the man himself, because when he does that, it's like he's not stepping into his power, as you were speaking about before.
Yeah, and I think that point that you make around the energy in the body, like that's everything. It's like, what's our capacity to be with the sensation and energy in our bodies? And I think we live in a society that's so cognitive, so mind dominant, to actually be in the body. Firstly, if there's trauma or there's experience of abuse or whatever it may be, the body could have been a scary place to be. So many people aren't in their body for that reason. And then for men, I can see that because they're not in their body, they get overwhelmed, especially if we're looking at women and, even if we're to venture into the feminine storm, to be able to hold that of a woman, you need to be able to hold yourself and your anger, your sadness, your grief, like every emotion. Because I mean, in the coaching work, I believe you can only take someone as deep as you go within your own self. And I think if you're going to hold a partner, you need to be able to be like, okay with, oh yeah, I'm okay with her being in her anger, because actually I can be in my anger and I know this landscape. I've gone into that inner world and I've explored it and I know what this looks like. Or I can be in my grief because I've brought my candlelight to that part of myself and seen it and felt it. And without that, that's where it can be too much and dysregulating, especially when it plays on wounds. If there is a wound around confrontation, then that unprocessed emotion is the trigger point for the fawn response or the shutting down or the freeze response, flight, fight, whatever's happening, right? And so the game is, how do you build your capacity to be with sensation in the body, to be with energy? And the more you can do that, the more you can hold, and the more you can hold others and their experience and be present. I know that I bought at the start of this conversation, I'm filling my cup and giving from the overflow. Last year, when my cup wasn't as full, I couldn't be there for my partner. I couldn't receive her as much in her emotions because it was overwhelming for me. And actually I would get resentful. There was like my inner teen, my inner child were likely to be more activated. Not likely, they were more activated. And it's because I didn't have me in the way that I needed to. And I think when you're a people pleaser or you're a nice guy, your cup is not full because you're giving and you're so focused on giving and you're losing yourself in people. You're not able to be that solid pillar that's like, okay, this is me energetically. I can feel people energetically, and often the people pleaser, like they're relatively tapped into empathy. Whether you want to say an empath, I think an empath is maybe someone who experiences emotional dysregulation and becomes really highly attuned and hypersensitive to it. So if you're that person, can you feel energy but not be taken by it? And that's really the game that I see for men and women, and I'll say particularly men in the emotional field, is how to build that capacity and ability to be with not only their own emotions, but other people's without getting taken out of their sovereignty.
Yeah, beautifully put. I always say it's like what we're looking to be is like having defined lines around us. Like as a human being, we look at each other, we see these defined lines, like there's an edge, visually, you're like, this is where David ends and this is where the air begins.
Yeah.
But like energetically, when we're kind of people pleasing and we're kind of moving in these nice guy ways of being, it's like there's no energetic boundaries between us and them. If someone else, say we are happy with a decision and someone else is angry with decisions, suddenly our okayness, as we kind of talked about before, suddenly disappears and becomes, we don't even feel it anymore. We're like, all our focus goes on to like, this person needs to be okay for me to be okay.
Yeah.
You know, it's a very similar thing I see with people who have anxious attachment. It's like, the relationship needs to be okay for me to be okay, right? If there's something I feels off with the relationship, no matter how tiny it is, then I can't be okay, so we need to fix it. And it's the kind of similar thing with the kind of people pleasing. It's like there's always this tentacles of their energetic tentacles reaching out in the room and being like, am I okay? Are other people okay? Are they happy with me? Because if they're happy with me, then I'm okay as I am. But if they're not, then I need to do something to make them okay. And that's like incredibly draining as well, energetically. Like, it's something to note here, where I've seen this with some of my clients who are people pleasers. It's like they feel exhausted just being, just trying to go through their day-to-day life. There's an exhaustion because they're always overextending their energy, you know. And if you're listening to this and you're like, energy, I don't understand. Well, what is your mental energy? Because your mind is always thinking like, oh, did that person didn't open the door for me. Does that mean they don't like me? Maybe I did something before. Maybe I need to say something to them now to make them like me some more. Or there's that woman. Does she think I'm awkward and weird? Am I being awkward and weird? You know, there's this constant thinking happening, and then the emotional roller coaster that happens with the thinking, that we're not aware that like all this thinking generates emotions and it burns through energy in us. So it's like this exhaustion that I see a lot of men carry because they're constantly having to be overly attuned to the environment. Like you said, it's this over attunement, and what they need to do is, and I always say this to my clients, is like, bring your energy back in instead of always being like, oh, that person, no, that person's there, you're here, you're cool, are you okay? Yeah, you're good, are you happy with you? Yes, you're right, pull it back in. Like, you know, there can kind of just be this feeling of like, oh, I don't need to make everyone okay to be okay. If they don't like me, that's okay. I'm okay if they don't like me. The world can go on, and they're probably okay with, you know, they probably don't like you. You just might not be their favorite person, and the world can go on. And like, that's a real practice of leaning into being kind of not liked. I think that's a really important piece of the people pleasing and breaking out of it is practicing not being liked and practicing expressing yourself in ways that could lead to people disagreeing with you or not agreeing with you.
Yeah. And I really found for myself, like, that journey took place within the inner child. And because like when I didn't have my inner child and there was someone who maybe didn't like me, my inner child's taking the wheel and being like, hey, we're getting liked. Like, we're going to get that acceptance. We're going to get that validation. Because at its core, all of it, the validation, the control that can sometimes take place for other people, if we're not looking at the other spectrum, people pleasing, the control, manipulation, like those sorts of things, it's all stemming from safety. It's all, I want to feel safe. And for people pleasers, it's, I will feel safe if this person likes me, if this person's doing well. And what that took for me was to go back to these experiences. I'll use my fear of rejection, right? And this is a common, I see this so much with people who are like, I want to be seen more. I want to take up space. I want to not give a fuck what people think about me. And there's a part of them, that's the part, that's their true self, their authentic selves. Like, I want to do that. Then they've got their wounded inner child or inner teen or whatever part of it them is. That's like, I don't want to be seen. It's not safe for me to be seen. It's not safe for me to take up space. I'm going to be judged. I'm going to be rejected. I'm going to be abandoned, embarrassed, humiliated. And I had to go to those parts of me in the part, let's say, that was rejected and just connect with him and be like, oh, this was a boy who just wanted to play. And he went through this experience. And these can seem like really small, quote unquote, small experiences. And this is where I see a lot of people go, I had a good childhood. I didn't have it that bad. So they neglect and they repress the experiences that they had that were significant for that version of them. And most importantly, were significant in the body, because the trauma isn't the experience, it's the way our body responds to it. And so in that moment when I'd been rejected on the playground, I went back to that version, not to live through him, not to repeat the experience, but to meet him, to create a safe space for him, to ask him what he needed to feel and express. And it was that sadness. It was that grief. Further down the line, as I got more connected to it, it was the fuck you energy. Like, fuck you guys for doing this to me. And then meeting his needs, knowing like, you're enough. Like, I've got you. You're okay. I love you. And so many people are trying to be seen, heard, and loved outside of themselves when really they need to feel, hear, and see themselves and love on themselves. And that's it's not out there. And that's the one message I would say to people is it's like, it's not found. You'll never find it in anyone else. Yes, we are humans and we have a need for belonging. That is like, we're social beings, and you can't find those things outside of yourself and expect to walk around with everything going well.
Yeah. People often, especially when we look at people who are like kind of outwardly successful, as humans, we like to kind of mimic or look at what they've done and follow it. But what we lose is what they've done internally, or their internal landscape. Like, they've gone back and gone, oh yeah, look, they've sat in therapy and they've gone through parts where they've done inner child healing, they've done shadow work, and they've met the parts of them are like, actually, I went back to that experience when I was a child where I was, rejected, and instead of putting those emotions in a box and just going, they don't matter, they're not affecting me, but they're still in your system. The story of what occurred is still being triggered by the today, present moment things. When you go and speak to a woman in a bar, not that people do that as much as they used to, in a bar, and she doesn't want to talk to you, and you feel this disproportionate sadness or anger or frustration, and you put it down to like, oh, she made me feel that. When actually what it is that there's an experience you had of being, a 5, 10, 15-year-old that's still living in your system, is still living in your psyche and in your emotional body, that gets triggered when you experience something in this moment. So we're not really reacting to the person in front of me, the woman who doesn't want to talk to us. We're reacting to that experience right back then. And as you described it, and as I'm hearing it, and I know from my own experience, it's like when we go back and visit that part of us, and it might not just be once, we might have to continue to do this over time, right? Go back and visit this part of us and be like, hey, I know you've just been really hurt. Like, how are you feeling? You're feeling this. Like, what is it that you really need in this moment? And because often in those moments in the past, we didn't get what we needed. There was either no one there, or we didn't feel we could express it to anybody, or whatever it may be. And it's like we get to kind of do that for ourselves in our past selves. Plus, and I imagine, I'm talking to a man who knows this, it's like we also get to do that for ourselves in the present moment. So like if we do then experience some rejection, and, we're coaches, so we experience a lot of rejection.
Exposure therapy.
Yeah. So you experience some rejection, you're feeling like really hurt and like, oh my God, like why doesn't people want to work with me, or whatever it may be? And you can stop and go, like what is it that I need right now? Like, what is it? Like, I'm feeling hurt, and maybe, I just need to remember that I'm a fantastic coach, and the clients I have are getting huge, massive results from working with me, instead of going into this kind of shame spiral. But yeah, that will just really float out of me, because I just see this as like, sometimes we think of inner child work and it can sound super woo and all this, but really there's a lot of scientific basis and research around the fact of getting in contact with those old emotions. Like I've been doing some work with around somatic experiencing, and really a lot of that is really, it's just somatic experiencing. I don't know enough about it to say, so this is going to be real generalization, but it's kind of like inner child work in disguise. It's like, go back to this part of you. What did he feel? What did you need? And like really doing it somatically and feeling the body. And it is just like these little pockets sometimes you feel that just like of energy that disperse, like, oh yeah, I felt when I was 10 years old and I was left in the playground, I felt really sad and I didn't feel like I can express that. And oh yeah, let me just touch that. Let me feel what that little David felt for a little bit. But what I see habitually for men is this, a desire to not feel that, to not go back to, and like you said, it's going to talk into what you said about emotional capacity. Often as men, we unconsciously, and as people, but I like to talk about men, unconsciously we don't believe in our own emotional capacity. We don't believe we have it. And often I think men's emotional capacity is far larger than he believes. But the story of like, oh, I can't touch that emotion, or I can't talk to that woman and face that rejection, that feeling of rejection, because it'll be too much for me. It will spiral me. It will take me out. But it's like the piece you said about kind of growing emotional capacity, which I think is vital. But there's also that part of like trusting in the capacity that we actually do have that we maybe have never really used.
Yeah, I think, like I spoke to earlier, it's like, it's almost like in old school games, if anyone have played them, like, I don't know, is it Red Alert or something like that? Like where you go explore a different part of a map and suddenly the map starts to open up, right? There are loads of games like that. So maybe Age of Mythology, those sorts of ones. That's what it's like in your emotional landscape. It's like, it's already there, but you're just familiarizing yourself with it, and it exists, and it's touching on it. It's that like, bit by bit, you start to feel more and expand into feeling more, and take this titrated approach where it's drop by drop by drop, you are expanding yourself. And yeah, that fear of like, it's going to be too much. I'm going to get lost in it. So often the stories around the pain and the stories around the emotions are so strong that they create this greater fear. It makes it bigger than it actually is. And so often, working with I'll speak to men, also women, but men I feel are more sometimes emotionally shut off. Like working with men who have, their parents died and they've shut that off for 12 years and they don't talk about that parent. They can't have conversations. They can't drive past their house where they used to live because they're so afraid of what that brings up in their body and don't have a clue how to actually feel it. And that's I really agree with you. Once these men, in my experience, have had the safety or the holding to start to find safety within themselves to unravel, it's all possible. And it's so often just the permission and also just the holding. And I think that's the key thing I witness within my own work when we run men's retreats for the Unmasked Man. Just when you can feel held and start to find that safety within and find safety in a space, like, and safety subjective. So different men will have different capacities or different people with different capacities. But when you start to find that, there's a softening, and that's when the armor can start to come off. That's when the walls can start to come down. That's when the heart can start to open that bit more and start to actually feel through the cracks, the light that shines in. I think Rumi says that, right? Through the cracks is where the light comes in. And it's those cracks that the light shines in, and that's what expands and opens the heart. And it's the feeling that allows us to experience more of life. Like the love I have with my partner, to get to that, I had to feel the grief. I went through a sudden breakup with a previous partner, and it ate me up. I was like, oh, this was intense. And for whatever reason, I was listening to I was in a coaching program, and they brought in a guest speaker, and he was talking about not consuming anything online. And I was like, oh, I'm just going to try that for 30 days. And so I wasn't consuming, and in the space of not being distracted, I felt it all. I felt all the grief. And I was sat there and just crying and feeling. And something that a previous partner did, I saw it on Instagram and it triggered me. And I'm like, why am I still triggered? And there was a part of me that was like, thought there would still be something else, thought there could be something. And I sat there and I said, like, in the absence of the idea that there could be anything more, what becomes available? And the answer was the pain. And I just broke down and was screaming and crying and angry and rageful and all of these things. And to actually face the truth of like, oh, this may not be anything more. And that could be for any experience. It could be like to actually face the pain of like, hey, this person's gone from life. Hey, this opportunity's gone. Hey, this thing didn't work out how I wanted it to, and I really wanted it to work out. Like, to actually admit to ourselves that something didn't, like, that it's in a different state to what we really want it to be. That truth, like that radical honesty with the self, is what cracks open to feeling. And it was because of that work, and then meeting with all the younger versions of me who had their hearts fragmented at some level, and loving on them. And I had this circle in my mind, like of like 6-7 different parts of me. And I was just loving on them, and I was giving them what they needed. And that's what allowed me to open my heart, because each of those experiences of rejection or abandonment or whatever it was closed me, like closed and expanded. And as I could be with them and feel and see and love them and hear them, my heart could open, and I could feel more love. I could feel more joy. I can feel more bliss and ecstasy. And as Carl Jung says, it's the tree that grows to heaven has roots that grow to hell. So men or women or anyone who's watching this, like, if you want to feel more of life, that requires exploring the depths.
Beautiful, man. Beautifully said. It's so true. There's so many people who walk around emotionally numb, right? Like numb, not feeling anything, right? And the key I felt for myself, and I see in my clients, is like, are you willing to feel the thing you don't want to feel? You know, when you were talking there, when you had that space of no consumption of online material for 30 days, there was a spaciousness to feel what was there, and you were willing to kind of go into it. And I guess the question for you is do you feel that giving yourself the space to feel all that, did that create more space to love and be loved? Yeah,
for sure. As I met my next partner and then started to go into like the experience of love with her and love her, like my heart came up against those the edges of what I knew what it was to love. And so I had to meet the parts of me that wanted to hold back my love, that were afraid. You know, I lost my dad, my uncle, my gran within 2 years of quite a relatively young age. And like my heart was just like, I was scared to love, like at some level, like after coming out of my first relationship, like there was a part of me that as I deepened into love was like, am I going to lose this person? And like that's a deep fear. I think that's probably one of the deepest fears when it comes to love. Like, what if I lose them? And I had to sit with that. And like that, and this is it. Like, so often it's the fear that can lead to the self-sabotage. Like, if I don't sit with that part of me, I'll push someone away. If I don't sit with the part of me that's, and I've seen this time and time again when there's my own work coming up, and it's happened a few times. Like I will look, there's a part of me that wants to push my partner away because of things that I'm feeling in my world. And that will create stories, that will create meaning. And like, that's where the inner work's needed to actually question and ask, like, hey, where's this coming from? What's going on? Why is my heart closing off a bit? Why am I walling up again? And then through the work and through the opening, it's like, it wasn't anything to do with them. It was me, right? And there's obviously nuance to that, but for me, that's been my experience. And so the more I could feel, the more I could go to these experiences and open myself up to feeling and expressing and emoting, the more that's become available of life, the more I can love, the more joy I have, the more play I have. And I think, as I said, when we're working with the inner child, like the inner child not only holds the pain and the past experiences, but the magic, the joy, the play, the beauty, the love. Like my love for singing is my inner child, my inner teen. My love for dance stems from there too. And it's almost that idea of like, to open our hearts to love ourselves, to love these parts of ourselves, to integrate the wounded and traumatized parts of ourselves, is bringing together the parts of us that we perceive to be not whole, broken, needing a fixing, right? But we're already whole, we're already complete, we're already enough. It's just that trauma fragments, and it's bringing in these pieces and calling them in and going like, I love you, and we are, like, I'm here with you all. And in that, this wholeness becomes a wholeness of expression. And one of my passions is authenticity. Like, I think each person who is listening to this and in this world has something unique that they are here to share. And it's in this realization and actualization of self and wholeness that gift gets shared, and the world becomes a better place because of it.
Yeah. Amen. Yeah. So many beautiful things you said in there. I'm trying to track them all in my mind. But yeah, the piece about authenticity, you know, we have these gifts, we have something beautiful to bring to the world. And like what gets in the way is that the fear, you know, and as you were talking about the fear of losing love. And I think that's probably one of the most, it's probably one of the most common fears around love, right? Is first is like, can I get it? Yeah. Can I get it? And then when we've got it, it's like, oh my God, am I going to lose it? And it's so easy to use our fear as a wall with other people. And I think as I say that, it's like so many people have walls that feel like kind of arrogance, or they feel like confidence, or even feels like meanness, or like I'm thinking even going further out to like world leaders, you know, they're the way in which they operate with each other. It can feel like there's like, oh, it's an arrogance, or he's an asshole, or like whatever it is. But actually, when we kind of dissect it, and I've seen this with men I've worked with, is to be dissect it. It comes down to there's a fear there. There's a fear, and the way to keep ourselves safe from experiencing the fear happening is putting up a wall. Like I think an easy example to use is like dating, relationships, love. It's like, oh well, if I'm traditionally avoidant, so it's like, oh, if I'm avoidant of love, I can build this wall of like being a Casanova and being a ladies' man and like being charismatic and all these things. I build this wall and people are like, oh wow, he's a Casanova, he's a ladies' man, like, you know, he's fun to be around, or he's aloof, or whatever it may be. But when we get deeper into it, at the root of that, the fear is the thing that's built the wall, right? So even when people come across as like walled off, it's like my curiosity is always like, oh, I wonder what the fear is for them. What's the fear underneath that? Like that way of being where like they're standoffish, or they like don't really feel like they're really with other people, or whatever it may be. But whenever I experience those walls, it's like, and I think we as a nation, or as a world of people, we're very quick into judgment. So it's like, oh, someone's a bit aloof and a bit walled off, like, they're an arsehole. But because we lack this kind of compassion, and you talked about a lack of compassion earlier, and I think, and I've read it in a few places, I think there's a real lack of compassion running through our ways of being with each other, not just with other people in our lives, but also with self, this real lack of compassion we have. And it stops us from going a bit deeper with each other, because instead of seeing the fear, all we see is the wall.
Yeah, I love that, David. And yeah, I agree. Like, yeah, compassion is a superpower, like to actually feel compassion for others. And yeah, it's the compassion initially for these parts of us, right? The wall, the fear, it's a part of us. And I know you'll know this, but like, it's that part of us that is protecting us at some level, right? Like Richard Schwartz talking about no bad parts. Like, there's no bad part. It's all just serving you at some level. And once you can figure out how it's serving you, then you can start to work with it. And I think when we talk about compassion, one of the things that comes to mind, I heard in a Brené Brown podcast years ago, is like, everyone's doing the best they can based on the level of awareness they have, the experiences they have had, and the resources they've had access to. And someone can choose to, like, my worldview has changed in taking on that perspective. Someone can choose whether that's true or not. But I do believe, like, if I was to be in a similar space, growing up in a similar environment, in the same conditions, I would probably turn out very similar. And there's a video on YouTube called the Compassion Project, or Compassionate Project. And they go into a high security prison, and they do a step inside the circle exercise where they're all around the edges of the prison yard. And they say questions like, step inside the circle if you had to start providing within the family from age 11. Step inside the circle if you experienced abuse. Step inside the circle if, and it goes on and on. And we come to see that the circle gets pretty tight, and that actually the people who are in prison are the most traumatized people in society. And when we can start to understand, and that's not to justify what they've done and the impact that's had, and compassion isn't about negating responsibility and people taking responsibility for themselves and their actions. But my life changed when I was able to be, and I guess through this work and being a coach, it's coming to realize this part. The more you explore with people, the more you see, oh, this part of you is just, there's a wounded part that's protecting you. And that's what is really there when we have compassion. It's understanding, oh, this has impacted this person in this way, and I can see where that leads to these results. Now, the side for any people pleasers to be aware of is that to rush into forgiveness, to be like, oh, my mom, my dad, they had trauma. Oh, yes, they like, I understand them. I understand. And this is the classic bypassing within the spirituality space is, yeah, I understand their trauma. And it's like, okay, you can understand their trauma, but have you felt the rage, the anger, the frustration, the sadness, the grief, the impact on your body from the experiences you had? Because whether you think you've forgiven someone mentally and whether your body still holds that charge and that energy, like it will be felt, like there will be a blockage at some level, or there will be some part of you that's like, hey, this actually isn't okay. And so we have compassion and also see compassion for others, compassion for ourselves, and also see what needs to be felt and what needs to be integrated. And that compassion for ourselves is the thing. Like if I'm judging someone, it's because I'm judging myself at some level, and that person is a mirror for me, and a beautiful mirror and a beautiful teacher for like, oh, I had it recently. I was judging. I noticed I was deep in my emotions, maybe a bit too deep and wallowing a bit. And I was judging people in their joy a bit. And I was like, what's going on here? And it's because I was like, at some level, I was like, oh, they're bypassing the deeper work. And that was just my story, right? To like make me feel better about, like, I was in the work and it was important, but I kind of got a bit lost in it. And that was my projection. And actually, as I started to fill my cup and had this overflow, I was like, oh, I'm feeling more joyful again. This is great. So like, look to our judgments, look to ourselves compassionately and with love, and not piling on more of that shame and guilt, because that's heavy. And this world sits in a heaviness of shame and guilt that we don't actually need to carry.
Yeah. It's so easy to be in our judgments, you know, and the world we live in is so judgmental. We're so quick to judge. There's this, you know, you feel it. There's this constant kind of judgmentalness that kind of comes up everywhere. And it's like there's an energy, you know, when you're on social media, you must experience as well. You're like, oh man, like you even see sometimes it's like people use judgment as a way to gather energy from other people. Like, I'm going to judge this person. You're going to jump on this judgment gravy train of this person. And we're all going to feel these intense emotions of righteousness or anger or frustration. And like, this is going to lead to my engagement and more money. But we just live in this time of like, so quick to judge and so slow to have compassion, you know, like you said, the compassion for self and other and the parts of us and even the emotions that are there. And always to remember there that there's a case for responsibility in compassion. And there's also, I like to always say this, compassion without, you need boundaries.
Yeah.
You know, there needs to be some level of boundary that we have with compassion, because, you know, endless boundaryless compassion is like probably quite draining on us.
Yeah, definitely leads to like compassionate exhaustion. And and I think we just look at the world, right? The world is I just want to say getting off on polarization. It's getting off on like left, right, up, down, whatever it is. And there's energy. There's so much energy that is going into that, like you said, that where else could that be going in someone's life? I get that there's sometimes a need for this energy and this drive behind certain movements. Like I see that. And also recognizing like just the conscious asking of like, is this energy serving me or the world that I'm wanting to create? And, you know, we could look at it with Elon and what's going on. Like every day, how much energy do people put into Elon Musk and what he does and what he says? And it's like, and defending him, not attacking him, whatever it is. And cool, if people want to do that, go ahead. But like, if you're here with a mission and something to share with this world, is your energy better put into Elon Musk, or is it better put into you serving your dharma, your purpose, connecting to your heart, loving the people in your space, giving in that way? And I think we live in a world that's so focused on attention and distraction and division. And if we're not divided, what's happening? We're together. We're like realizing that actually we're not so different, that we deeply want a lot of the same things. And that's the truth of it, is that like, it's the division and the separation that keeps us in fear, that keeps us out of compassion and out of our gifts and our giving in community and loving more deeply as a species. Yeah,
man. I feel you there. It's like it siphons off people's life force. You know, they spend hours in the divisional energy vortex of like, you know, and I think we're going off on the tangent, but I think this is still important because I think as people, as you know, and again, I always put my focus on men. It's very easy for us to get lost in like this outside stuff of like Elon Musk is saying this and the vaccine people are saying that and the anti-vax people are saying that, and it's like it's been going on for years. I feel like I saw this start to happen around obviously COVID when everyone had more time, right? And it's a really interesting thing right around that. It's like suddenly everyone had more time around COVID, right? Everyone had more time on their hands because they weren't working, they weren't drinking, they weren't out so much. And it gave us the space to like put our attention towards some really good movements, you know, like George Floyd that got a lot of airtime, which it wouldn't have got if it wasn't for the fact that people weren't working. Or there's other movements that occurred in that time. Mental health became a big focus for people, right? And it's interesting that during that time as well, there was a lot of people that get sucked into the kind of like conspiracy / non-conspiracy theories and were like putting so much energy through that and losing time and energy. And instead of, like you said, putting their time to what's meaningful, like their relationships, the people that matter to them, their purpose, the things they really want to do, their children, they're on their phones getting angry. And it's this anger and righteousness, this two kind of polarizing pieces. It's like, oh my God, he said that. I'm so angry. I'm livid. I'm going to type angrily on my phone. Or this like continuously taking us through these emotional roller coasters, which just kind of takes our energy away from the things that are meaningful or things that are actually worth putting our energy to. And it's just this cycle I see in people. And sometimes people have said to me like, oh, you don't seem like you really care about these things. It's like, I do care, but me getting angry about what this dude said who I don't know and I have no way to influence says doesn't serve me. I'm just going to get on with the things that's like really meaningful for me and so forth. But so many people's existence is like on Twitter, on Instagram being angry. And I think going back to the emotional piece is like, it gives people a place and time where they're allowed to be angry, because there's so much of their life they don't feel that they can ever like express anger, like maybe to their partner or a boundary. But it's like, I can be angry at Elon because I'm never going to meet him. I'm never going to see him. He's never going to be in front of me. I'm just being angry at this things he says without any kind of maybe deeper understanding for who he is as a person. It's like it's an allowable way to like express this anger, but it's still quite unhealthy because it's quite unconscious and it's kind of what's it called? It's also like a bit uncontained. And it's like, it's you're getting on the wave or on the crest of a wave that isn't of your conscious choosing, you know, it's just like a group energy that you're just falling into.
And also there's no, like, the energy might actually not be moving as much, right? It's just like in the body. And if that's the energy that's going there, where else is that energy? Because like where your energy and focus goes, like that's what's expanding in your life. And so if your energy and focus is onto like hate and aggression and anger in these sorts of ways, then like you're breeding that. And so where else is that showing up? And I also think you're right. Like this is people's a chance to let me get this out. Let me say these things. And that's the issue, is we also live in a world that is so devoid of radical responsibility. Like we see it at the highest level of leaders. Our leaders have no radical responsibility for their own actions. They like constantly, and like even if they were to, like it doesn't matter. Like and that's where it's like, I think we can look to try and bring that in at some level through, but is commenting on a Facebook video really going to bring in that? Or is me living my life and trying to be the best for me, the best man I can be for my partner through the work that I do, through what I share in the world? Like that's energy that may actually start to ripple out and create a difference. And I can actually control that. And like you said, so many people are giving away energy to what they cannot control. And if we were to circle this back to people pleasing, like the people pleaser gives away energy to other people, to other experiences, to all these things that we can't control. And it's in what we consume. It's in what, like, the comparisons we make. It's in our judgments of others. It's all like these things. You're either putting energy into what you can control or putting energy into what you can't. And everything that you can't control is draining from your life force and energy, and where you can actually commit real change in your life.
Yeah. It just comes down to the agency and feeling you have agency, and also being in victimhood as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there can be experiences where we're a victim, but are we taking through the victimhood consciousness? Right? Like an earthquake happens and you can be a victim of the earthquake. But 10 years later, if you still don't go outside because of an earthquake, you're holding the consciousness. And so that's then that person's responsibility to do the work around their relationship to that experience. But there's an energy that people get from being the victim and making someone else the villain and waiting for the rescuer, right? The drama triangle.
Exactly.
And so who are you making your hero? Who are you making the villain? Like, and look to those people, like, why? How does it serve you? And it's not actually serving your highest good, because you're disenfranchised. You're not taking your power back from these like energetic strands. I have this image of like an octopus that's just got all these energetic strands, and they're all out there. And like, if the octopus has got all its strands out there, like it's dictated by their movements and where they're going, and probably stretching out super far. But if you can pull in those like 8 energetic tentacles, or however many this energetic octopus has, like that energy becomes available for you to put into things that matter.
Yeah. Amen. And it's, if you're listening to this and that energetic piece just feels like, oh, that's a bit odd. Think of it of one of my mentors used to call it thought loops. Got these thought loops running in your mind, like you have tabs open on your laptop.
Yes.
Or processes running, and you've got this process that's thinking about Elon, what Elon's doing, and you've got another process thinking about your ex and another ex, and like all this stuff that constantly takes up space in your mind is clouding and taking up energy where you could be putting it towards something that's really meaningful for you.
Yeah. And what I think of is like, for us to have the clear channel for Riverside, right? Like one of the things that you ask for is make sure everything else is closed down. Make sure all the other tabs are closed. Like if I've got all these tabs open, and if like, as I scroll through the pages, there's tabs open from childhood, and there's tabs open from when I'm a teenager, an adult, and there's these incomplete processes and energy. Like my operating system is slow. My operating system is filled with so much, and I actually can't be a channel for what wants to move through me. Like whether it's God, divine, nature, spirit, like I can't be the channel if I'm blocked. And so it's like, how can I look at those tabs and start to close them? And then I have so much more energy to be who I'm here to be.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a beautiful way to put it. We don't always look at it that way, but that is really that's the aim of the work you're talking about around, inner child healing and so forth, is to just close down those processes to release the energy, back into ourselves.
Yeah.
The RAM, the space, whatever, to give ourselves a level of spaciousness and presence, and that we can be with, this moment here and not be distracted constantly and so forth. Kieran, man, I know we could probably talk about this for hours, but I feel like it'd be a really good place to kind of wrap up there. But I have one more question before we go. And I think I want people to, always keen for men to have kind of really actionable takeaways. If a man is listening to this and he's like, okay, I want to feel more, like what's some kind of like really grounded practical things that he can go and do right now in his life to practice feeling more?
The first thing that came to my mind was start to get into your body more. So what I would say is nature came to mind. Like, get into nature and use your five senses. Get your feet on the earth, like breathe, smell in wherever it is. For me, it's like the pine forest nearby. Just smell that. Notice the breath, notice the wind on your body, notice the taste in your mouth. Like, start to get into the body more and out of the mind. Meditation can be a really powerful tool. If you run like a bit more in the hyper arousal, so like fight, flight, anxious, panicky energy, like just get shaking, get the body moving, shake it out, shake that energy out. Meditation was a game changer for me to starting to connect to my body. The body knows what to do. Like, the more you can get into the body and out of your mind, your body knows what to do. The animal that gets chased through the savannah, when it's safe, it will shake. The more you can connect to your body, the more you know what to do. So get into nature, get into your senses, start creating space and separation in your life from distraction, from like time where you get to be either still or deeply present. And that will start to bring up the things that are the tabs that are open. And that's where meditation and observation of, okay, this is a thought, I'm going to come back to the present. This is a thought, I'm going to come back to the present. I think those can be some really actionable ways to start to just get into the body. I think that's enough to start with, right? There's so many ways to then start feeling, but if you're not in your body, if you're not feeling safe in your body, you're not going to be able to feel in a way that's actually processing emotion. So getting into the body, out of survival mode, into the rest and digest, the parasympathetic, is going to be the best. And you spoke to somatics earlier. Breath, movement, sound, touch, using those as tools to start to integrate into your life, and knowing that it's like going to the gym. You don't just go to the gym and expect to lift up 50 kg in your arm. You've got to train, and you've got to train your nervous system and your body to feel.
Fantastic. That's beautiful, beautiful advice, beautiful actions. I'm sure that listeners are wondering, where can they find you? What have you got coming up in terms of like programs and work where people can join you?
Yeah, thanks, David. So yeah, you can find me predominantly on Instagram, Kieran Pollitt _. I have a podcast called Authentic Expansion. And yeah, I love that, like the Authentic Man podcast. Like, I really love what you're doing here. And in terms of upcoming programs, there's just there's some things in the works. So stay tuned around like a program that I'm developing and getting ready to be obsessed about, so that I can share it with the world. And I've got an event called Authentic Expansion, a day event or half-day event running in London on the 29th of March. It's called No More Masks, and it's all about uncovering what's underneath the mask, and involving somatics, nervous system regulation, and shadow work.
Fantastic. That sounds beautiful. Fantastic, man. Well, thank you for today. This is the conversation is weaved and danced so beautifully around one of the most important topics that affects every man in his life today. So I'm super grateful for your time and your energy today and your wonderful wisdom.
Yeah, thank you, David. And yeah, really beautiful to get to connect with you in this way and to have this conversation, and loved your questions and your insights, and getting to learn from your experiences in the world too. So yeah, thank you for everything that you're doing and the example you get to be to men who are partners, who are fathers, and who are sovereign beings. Like, yeah, your work's so important, and really excited that we got to share this space together.
Thank you, man. Much appreciated. Really appreciate that. Listeners, if you've enjoyed this episode, head over to Kieran's podcast and, jump into a few more episodes of his. If you've enjoyed this episode, share it with somebody. This is the key. It's like, if you want the people in your life to relate to you differently, be able to rate them differently, share this sort of thing with them, send them over a link, maybe say something that helped them or something interested, or, listen to it with a partner, because, this is what does the ripples that go out And I also want to say a big thank you to the people I've never spoken to and never met who do share my podcast, because every so often someone comes into my work and they're like, oh, a friend of mine shared the podcast or someone shared it. And I just want to say thank you to you guys and girls who are out there sharing, because I really appreciate that. And the ones of you that are putting out reviews and so forth. So my heart goes out to you. I'm very grateful. And feel free to drop me a message on Instagram as well. It's always nice to connect with people. But we'll stop there. And we'll let you get on with the rest of your day. Thank you, Kieran.
Thank you, David.